Wild Things, Chapter 1, Part 3. "Hurry up before someone sees," Della called out in a strained whisper. She was bouncing in the driver's seat now, rattling with nervous energy. All she needed was for Everett to find out what they'd gotten up to. He'd probably call off the wedding right then and there. And Adeline was almost certain she didn't want that. Everett hadn't even bothered to question her when she'd asked for the truck, Adeline realized. He had simply trusted her. She was never really sure why he'd chosen her, or how he'd made up his mind to love her. But he had, and he did, and when he'd asked to marry her, she'd said yes. It had all happened so suddenly, she hadn't had but a minute to consider why. Truthfully, it scared her. To be loved so surely. She could only wish to be so decided about anything. But when he'd asked, she had figured that if she was going to feel something for anyone, it would be Everett. He was a good man, sure-footed and considerate, fine-looking too, and for whatever reason, he'd decided that Adeline hung the moon. Of course, that had been before. She had no doubt he'd feel different if he ever learned what she'd let Lee talk her into. "Would you hurry it up?" Della threw over her shoulder, never letting the wheel loose. From the rear view, she could see that Lee had Billy leaned up against the cargo box now, and she was dancing around him, trying to maneuver him up into it. "Well, aren't you demanding for someone who ain't helping with the heavy lifting?" Lee chided, but her heart wasn't really in it. She was just happy that Della had agreed to come along at all. Usually these sorts of things were always left up to Lee and Ray. They were the troublemakers. "Just come on, Lee," Della begged. "Aw, well, she's eager, ain't she?" Billy hiccuped, belching at the end of it. He pardoned himself and smiled real wide, stumbling over his own feet as Lee tried to nudge him into the truck. Leanne almost felt bad for Billy, being so gullible as he was. Almost. But then she thought of Ray's split lip, the garish bruise round her eye, a sickly yellow and clotted black welt that refused to be ignored. And she felt her rage come on again, thick in her blood and charging through her. She felt her pulse, like a stampede of wild horses, and she heaved Billy into the truck bed, with the strength that only a woman pissed enough could possess. Billy made a noise of surprise, startled to find himself suddenly sprawled in the back of the truck. He scooted back against the front panel and shifted a bit, trying to make himself comfortable for what he was sure would be the ride of his life. "Get on up here, girl," he called in a slur, patting at his legs, sprawled open, the toes of his boots pointing at opposite ends of the truck bed. "Oh, not here." Lee purred. "Gotta find somewhere private." She smiled as Billy nodded giddily and settled further into the rusted cargo box. He hiccuped again, muttering something she couldn't understand but what sounded mighty enthusiastic. "Well, all right then," he slurred. Then he reached down into his britches, getting a firm hold of himself, rolled into a corner of the truck bed, and started to snore. "Well, that was easy," Lee laughed, her chest heaving with heavy breaths. Adeline's look of reproach was reflected in the side and rear mirrors. "Just get in," she said over the wheezing, splattering cough of the engine given a bit of gas and coming back to life. "I gotta get the truck back by midnight." Leanne rolled her eyes and scrambled up into the truck bed, taking care to sit as far away from Billy's prone body as she could manage. She sat with her back rested against the two large, lumpy sacks they'd left in the bed. It was far from comfortable, but much preferred. Just the sight of Billy, laying there peaceful, was enough to rile her up all over again. It took all her strength not to reach behind her for one of those sacks. Lord, the urge made her hands twitch. Instead, she reached over and knocked the side of the truck, grabbing hold of it just in time as Della took off like a shot. Thanks for listening to this excerpt from Wild Things. This story is available on Inkit.com, Wattpad.com, and Neobook.org. Visit any of those sites to like, comment, and review. Add Wild Things to your reading list to receive notification of upcoming chapters and to learn what happens next.